Bruce here, and today we're going to cover First Chronicles. First Chronicles is a two-part book. There's also a Second Chronicles, and at one time they were all part of the same book. These books were written by Ezra, and the purpose of the book was to bring God's people together and really show the trace from the line of David, and really tie it back to Adam, back in the Garden of Eden, and to show that the genuine worship, what it looks like, and it should be a center of our life and how we operate as a culture. The book was written by Ezra, and it was written about 430 BC, but the events happened much earlier than that in time. And the book's broken into two major sections. The first part really just describes a genealogy. So if anybody's done a family tree, that's essentially what's happening here. And it's a little bit of a dry read, I have to be honest. It's the son of so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, and so on. But the second piece covers the reign of David, and there's some interesting facts within that section. So as we look at the genealogy piece of it, there's a long list of names that shows the history of God's work in the world, and really ties it back, as I said, to Adam, all the way up to the current time of David as we catch up in the book here. Now, some of the names remind us of stories of great faith, and other ones maybe not so much, and it could even touch on failure. And then there's some names that you probably, as we look back through the previous books of the Old Testament, we don't recognize. So there's some refresher here, but the importance of that is that, whether we know the names or not, all the names are known to God, and God will remember us when we die as well. Now, when we look at the reign of David in the second part of this book, David loved the Lord, and he wanted to build a temple to replace the tabernacle, but God denied his request. And David's greatest contribution to the temple wouldn't be the actual construction of the temple, but his preparation so that it could be constructed later. And we, in our own lives, we might not be able to see the fruits of our labors, for God in our own lifetime. But David's example is a great example that helps us understand that, when we serve God, he will see his results in what we do, not that we will see our own results. And that's a powerful lesson. So as we get into the book itself, the first section of the book reviews the Hebrew history and goes through a genealogy. And this will look very familiar because it starts to cover the 12 tribes of Israel. And, the top 10 tribes, as we've heard about before in earlier parts of the Old Testament, represent the northern half and the northern kingdom, if you will. And the bottom two represent the southern kingdom. And we're familiar with those as the ones that David ruled. And now, as we look at a little deeper into the book, it talks about King Saul's problems and how he consulted a medium, and that can be found in 1 Chronicles 10. But if you remember, we also heard about that in 1 Samuel 28, chapter 28. And there's also a lot of linkage to the fortress of Zion, and later calling it the city of David before landing on the name of Jerusalem, and talking about that change over time, and that the Lord telling King David that his line would always be the royal line, but he wouldn't build the temple, his son would. And also talks about David's census, showing he had 1.5 million plus men of military age, but it wasn't authorized by God. And David in this book was given credit for getting the materials ready for the temple, but not for its ultimate construction. So as we look at the book and some of the themes that are represented in summary of this book, the important place to start is certainly Israel's history. Now, historically, Israel, by retelling this history in genealogy form and the stories of the kings, the writer Ezra laid down a true spiritual foundation for the nation. And the point there is that God kept his promises, and we're reminded of them with this historical record of his people, the leaders that served, the prophets that were there, the priests and the kings that led the nations. That's important because Israel's past formed a reliable basis for reconstructing that nation after the exile. And because God's promises are revealed in the Bible, we can know God and trust Him to keep His word. Just like Israel, we should have no higher goal in life than being devoted servants of God. The next theme is God's people. And as we listen to this genealogy piece, or the earlier part of the book, by listing all those names of Israel's past, God established Israel's true heritage. They were all in one family, coming from Adam, one nation in Abraham, and the priesthood under Levi, and one kingdom under David. And the national and spiritual unity of the people was important to the rebuilding of the nation. And that's important because God's always faithful to His people. He protects them in every generation and provides leaders to guide them, although they don't always take the same form. And because God has been at work throughout the centuries, His people can trust on Him, or trust in Him, really, to work for what's happening in the present. And we can all rely on His presence today. As we look at that theme of David the king in First Chronicles, the story of David's life and his relationship with God shows us that God appointed him as leader. And David's devotion to God, the law that God had laid out in the temple, true worship, the people, justice, sets the standard for what God's chosen king should act like. And that's important because Jesus Christ came to earth as a descendant of David. One day He's going to rule as king over all the earth, and His strength and justice will fulfill God's ideal for the king. He is our future hope. And, we can experience God and His kingdom now by giving Christ the complete control of our lives. This theme of true worship. David brought back the Ark of the Covenant to the tabernacle at Jerusalem to restore what true worship should look like for the people. And God gave the plans for building the temple. David organized the priests and made worship central to all of Israel. That's important because the temple stood as the throne of God on earth, the place where you could worship truly. God's true throne is in the hearts of His people. And when we acknowledge Him as the true king over our lives, true worship takes place. Finally, the theme of the priests throughout the book. God ordained the priests and Levites to guide the people in faithful worship according to His law. And by leading the people in worship according to God's design, the priests and Levites were an important safeguard to Israel's faith. That's important because for true worship to remain central in our lives, God's people need to take a firm stand for the ways of God, as recorded in the Bible. Today, all believers are priests for one another, and we should encourage each other in any way, really, that brings us towards faithful worship. And that's First Chronicles in 10 minutes or less.